Welcome to Make Your Money Matter with Brad Barrett, the show that aims to change the way you think about wealth management. Brad is a certified financial advisor, established radio host, and author of Retire Right. He is a managing director and partner at One Capital Management, an SEC-registered investment advisory firm managing over $4 billion for clients across the nation. Brad and his team are dedicated to helping clients protect and preserve their assets so they can reach their investment and retirement goals. And now, your host of Make Your Money Matter, Brad Barrett.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Make Your Money Matter. I'm your host, Brad Barrett. I'm also a managing director and partner here at One Capital Management, and I'm here each and every week to help you have a better relationship with your finances and with your money, because after all, your money matters. Hey, this week's episode is going to be a little direct. We've all been feeling it. We saw what happened about a month or two ago. We've been seeing really what's been happening, quite frankly, this entire year. The Dow Jones and the S&P 500, the Dow in particular, about a month ago, fell about 1,000 points, basically on a Friday, because apparently Fed Chairman Powell's attempt to use a brief speech to channel the ghost of the old school Paul Volcker. And this was, part of the market's worries. And we're going to talk about that today. No different than what we saw last week with the Fed's meeting on raising the interest rates again. And I'm titling this week's episode, of how to protect your portfolio through the storm. And the storm I'm mentioning here being inflation, supply chain, the impending recession. It feels like there's an economic challenge around every corner this year, doesn't it? But here's what I want to say. The good news is you can still protect your assets, your nest egg. And I'm going to talk about that today. You can protect it whether you're got a couple of years working, or you now here 20, 30 years working, or maybe you're in retirement. Doesn't matter. We just had a review with a client, in fact, who is looking to head into retirement here in about a year. And we had the conversation around retirement not being a finish line. And by the way, real quickly, as I've shared on this show many times before, retirement can be defined not just by being 65 or 70. Retirement is really more around becoming financially free, whatever age that might be for you. And I want to reiterate my point that I made to my client about retirement not being a finish line, because it matters when we talk about the volatility and protecting a portfolio through the storm, like what we've seen here in 2022. Retirement or becoming financially free isn't a finish line. It's a celebration maybe of a wonderful career, or maybe a business that you started and sold maybe, and now you are financially free. But once you retire, whether you're 35 or 65, barring a national holiday, markets are open on Monday. I say this often, and I hate to sound like I'm beating a dead horse here, but God willing, the same amount of time you had working, or in the years you built up to becoming financially free, you'll have in your retirement. So we have to look at our money, your assets, the stocks, your bonds, as long-term. The world is a pretty crazy place right now. I think we all can agree with that. I don't think that's an aha statement to anybody. I mean, from high inflation and rising interest rates to these major market fluctuations recently, to really the ultimate economic uncertainty, I think it goes beyond anything we've seen really since 2008 from a volatility perspective. And I've spoken heavily on this, and I'm very open about the fact that I actually personally believe, I think all of us collectively have been a little bit spoiled. We've all been a little spoiled over the past 14 years or so since 2008 with low interest rates. We basically started at nothing, zero, after the Great Recession, or the great uncertainty in the financial crisis of 2008. So this is a little bit of a coming to Jesus moment, I think, for a lot of investors in a lot of the world. And I want to share something that our minds can play tricks on us sometimes. And that's why I talk about it from a planning perspective. We're going to have headwinds. Markets correct. That's a normal systemic part of a market. And when you talk about a bear market, the rule of thumb, when you hear about a bear market, is that once you hit 20% on a market, an index like an S&P 500 or a Dow Jones Industrial or a broad market, you enter into bear territory, which we did this year. And I've spoken about that. The reality is, if we think about it, we've actually had two 50% market corrections in the past 20 years. That is a historic situation. We've never had that in any 20-year period before. And I'm speaking, by the way, of 2008 and 2020. Now, when I talk about our minds playing tricks on us, we get a little bit of what I'll call a hangover effect. We feel like the current correction being at, currently 18, 20% or so and dipping just, over 20% a couple months ago. And this is more of a correction, whereas at the time when I'm talking about those crises, those were more of a recession or depression kind of environment. And again, I'm saying this to back the whole aha moment. Really, the question here is, what does all of this heavy economic weather, if you want to call it that, mean for your investments? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So before I go into some of these items I'm going to bring up here, I want to just blanketly state this, that it's really important that you have a trusted advisor, a trusted counsel with you to help make any of these items I'm going to bring up actually successful for what your plan is, what your investments are. Remember, I've used this analogy before. The investments are what you put in the car. The car itself is the plan. It needs to get you from point A to point B. You want to add a stock in there? That's one thing, but it has to fit in the car and has to be in the direction you're going. So the number one thing I want to bring up, and I'm going to call it a stress test. The best place to start, again, is by using an advisor. You hear me all the time say this because we are able to use software, proprietary data, Monte Carlo scenarios to be able to help you plan and use planning and forecasting to figure out what a period of no or low growth may mean for your retirement. I mean, ideally, this should be something a little bit more robust than some free software you can find on the internet or some, internet search you use to kind of plug in some numbers, because you want enough bells and whistles to let you know and to take something that's what I'll call two-dimensional and make it more three-dimensional, more dynamic. You want to add things like inflation numbers to it. You want to add different stress tests of conservative or aggressive rates of return, because it lets you play around with the different variables and really understand the potential consequences of your actions. And what I mean by consequences really is, I shared this, I think, on last week's show. A lot of times with money, and I've noticed this in about 19 years of being in the financial services industry, is what we don't do matters more than what we do. By the way, my son actually heard me say that the other day and he laughed hysterically. He's 7 years old, mind you. But it matters. And I talk about my clients this way. What we don't do almost matters more than what we do. And if we think about that from a year like this, our emotional reactions to things can sometimes get us off track. And again, a qualified advisor can help you identify a lot of this and help you with that. So number one, and I'll just come out of the gate here and just say, look, stress testing your portfolio against all of these scenarios. Yes, you can do that. A lot of people will come to me and say, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could forecast into the future. I mean, it's predictable numbers, but it's not guaranteed, but you can. And these variables I mentioned, should be things like what we see if inflation went to 6% or 8% or 10% for the next decade. What if I lose 20% of my portfolio value in the next 3 years? What if my annual rate of return during retirement is 5% when my plan actually says I need 7%? And I talk about this a lot for those clients who are with us here at One Capital Management. We do this in what we call our black book. It's our wealth forecasting. It's a proprietary wealth forecast that we've built, and we use a lot of great predictable numbers. We use something called a Monte Carlo scenario that takes thousands of different scenarios across multiple different decades and periods of the market, and we measure how the specific plan for our client measures up. Stress testing matters, because by stress testing your portfolio against these scenarios I just mentioned, you can figure out if you got a gap between your projected income and level of income needed to finance your lifestyle, whether you're retiring at 30 or 70. And if so, how big is that gap? And how do we manage that? And what do we need to do to act towards it? And you've heard the term before, knowledge is power. We learned that in school. It also does something that I want to say very openly, that is, it's more psychological. It helps you in your mind calm the anxieties. The more you know, the knowledge helps calm the anxieties and the fears you're having right now. And the reality is, we need to kind of split open the purview instead of looking through it like, a dime-sized hole. We need to kind of look at it from a windshield. And I think a lot of times, I was just talking with a client this morning before recording here today, that they were talking about watching a lot of the news reports going on. And I think many of you out there watching and listening to me right now have seen this. And I'm like I said at the top of the show, this one's gonna be a little more direct. So I wanna speak to you today because we deal with it every day here at our firm, managing nearly $4.5 billion for clients across this great nation of ours. And I wanna share this. That's why we do the Make Your Money Matter show. And I mentioned this comment that I saw a while ago as a quote, and it really resonated with her because she was struggling. It's not the water around the boat that sinks the ship, it's the water that gets in. So there's news around us left and right. It's what you let get in and then what you do with that information that disrupts your plan. And I think a lot of us right now might need to, take a hard swallow on that and really figure out, is that you? And I think it's really important that a stress test and a plan actually helps kind of weed out some of the information, and I'll say some of the disinformation that's out there. Remember, 25 years ago, we didn't have news coming to us in 140 characters like we do on Twitter now. It was much more thought out journalism. We don't have that anymore. That's why on a show like Make Your Money Matter, we want it to be a longer format. I don't want to give you 2-minute little quotes, every week, because that's not going to do anything for you that's different than what you can get on other channels. Outside of the stress test, the second thing I want to bring up around protecting your portfolio, which is the theme for today, and helping calm the anxieties and fears during a market like we're seeing this year, and we do this here at, as advisors here at One Capital, is to maximize your savings options. So we want to stress test the portfolio, figure out where the gaps are, what you need, and then ultimately back into maximizing your savings options, which takes advantage of all the savings vehicles you might have right now. Maybe it's a client I've already spoken to about this who's watching or listening here who may not be contributing to a 401k plan or a retirement plan, or maybe recently lowered their contribution, whether it's because, they want to look at another house or invested somewhere else or had other cash flow disruptions. And maybe it's someone who's just watching right now who subscribes to our channel and really needs to hear this. Now's the time to look at your cash flow. Take a look at all the adjustments that I'm having, whether it's cost of living adjustments, maybe any promotions, and see if you can increase your contributions, your cash flow, because dollar cost averaging is an anecdote to a lot of volatile investing. When you're able to induce and contribute new fresh capital into a volatile market, if you look at studies, you're able to buy at different points. What's the one thing we all know about investing? I don't care if you got a Harvard degree or you're just out of high school, doesn't matter. The one thing we know about investing, the core thing we learned probably from our grandparents or our parents when we're young, is buy low, sell high. The reality is when we have lower prices like we have right now, things are essentially on sale. Now, by the way, speaking as a portfolio manager here, I'm not saying that everything across the board is on sale, but there are definitely opportunities. Think of it this way. If you look right now as what happened from last year into 2022, look at it as a one step backwards for a potential 2-step forward. Don't get lost in the one step and say, oh my gosh, I lost everything. It's done. Well, technically it's only done if you sell, if you cash out and you just ride off into the sunset with whatever you have right now. You want to maximize that one step backwards right now to get the leverage you need to launch for the next 2 steps. And the next 2 steps might be the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, who knows, 20 years. Dollar cost averaging and increasing your capital contributions to any savings plans you have. This is a perfect time to do this during volatility because you want to take advantage of this market volatility and these lower prices. Essentially, everything that we're seeing this year has basically come off prices from last year. We're giving back some of the gains from last year. Some of those gains are just because of sentiment or volatility. Others are actually factual and there's issues going on in that sector or that industry. Make sure you sit with an advisor or portfolio manager to help you figure out what is what and take advantage of the ones that you see future value for.
Stay connected. Get frequent updates on the show. Follow Brad Barrett and Make Your Money Matter on most social media platforms. And catch full episodes of Make Your Money Matter streaming now on our YouTube channel. To schedule your no-obligation appointment, go to onecapital.com or call 805-410-5454.
The third thing I want to bring up when it comes to planning, and again, I speak about this a lot, especially when I talk about buckets and splitting the egg, there are 2 types of expenses that ultimately define your retirement lifestyle. Very plainly, you can call them fixed or variable. I talk a lot about this. I use 2 adjectives a lot of times, the 2 4-letter words of need and want. Fixed expenses comprised of, unavoidable costs like you incur year in and year out. You have no control over them, whether you pay them or not. Things like your mortgage, your utilities, real estate taxes, maybe even kids' college fees, because these expenses tend to be what we'll call it non-negotiable. We need to dictate a specific part of your portfolio to cover those. Whereas more predictable income investments, dividends, yields, maybe fixed income, maybe pensions if you are in retirement, structured notes, treasuries, will do these kind of things to generate that income for those fixed accounts. Cash management, by the way, is a large part of portfolio management. And these types of ways you structure a portfolio when you ultimately get to using the assets, they come into play. And there's a lot of stability out there if you know what you're looking for. Now, in some cases, predictable rates of return can actually be there depending on certain products and different kinds of things. And they can be tied directly to your fixed outgoings. So that's a good way to kind of look at your plan if you're looking into that. Tie your fixed with your fixed. Outflow versus what's coming in from your investments. And you kind of want to resist the temptation to overcorrect by investing. Your whole retirement plan or your whole investment into these vehicles, because people might say, well, Brad, those seems really great. They're kind of steady, they're great, but they might be too conservative for the entirety of your portfolio. If you look at it this way, there's an old adage, right? We're supposed to get more conservative as we get older. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but you have to put it in context, because take right now, for example, if you were to get really conservative, inflation might outstrip your expansion rate, leaving you worse off than you were before. I mean, let's say cash right now was paying 1%. Let's say you can get over 1.85 or 2% at some banks, but inflation on average for the next 10 years might be 4%, 3 or 4%. You're losing 3% on your cash right now. So we don't want to, get overly conservative, and we likely don't want to get overly aggressive. So you want to be very careful not to just, run into the corner and say everything's fearful and I don't understand it. You want to have some market exposure. Again, you want to look at this with your advisor, but you want to make sure you have some of that growth and value growing with the market in some uncorrelated positions. If you kind of just say, I'm just going to go completely conservative because it's safe, I'm like, is it? I mean, look, I'm not saying it's across the board, because, you won't necessarily see a negative return on your cash account, but you will when you go try to buy gas at the pump or buy milk or coffee, 10 years from now, because the dollar you have today won't be worth the same dollar then. If you have $100 today and you run at 10%, you only got $9 10 years from now. It's just math. And inflation is tricky, I think, for a lot of people, and I want to touch on it again today, because it's not tangible. Like, we can't touch, feel, and taste it. So you want to be careful not to put all your investments, in inflation protected environments, because us as advisors, our job is to structure your fixed expenses or your needs with some of the more predictable income oriented items within your portfolio. Now, the variable expenses, these are what I'll call your lifestyle expenses. They cover, which you have some control over, things like vacations, entertainment, travel, and they should be financed by a separate part of your portfolio to avoid eating into your money, right? Basically, going into principal for your fixed expenses, we normally do this by walking through equities and the growth of your portfolio into areas that can attach to the distribution rate for what I'll call your wants or your lifestyle, And by the way, there might be some features that kind of go back and forth between fixed and variable. For example, medical premiums. I'm just bringing this one up just because as an example, it came up with a client the other day, is a fixed expense, but any cost you or a family member experience due to like ill health or injury should ideally be covered by a variable expense, because those aren't planned. So there are scenarios where one drifts into the other. But the item I want to bring up here, outside of stress testing, working with an advisor, and understanding your asset classes, is also taking advantage of making sure you know how your investments are structured. The next thing I want to bring up, and this is kind of a blanketed statement here, so be ready for anything here. Life has uncertainties. It's inevitable. That's how God designed it. And when our brains can, attach to our emotions, and I should say can really attack our money concepts. And that's where we want to be careful. I talk about this a lot. For anyone who watches and subscribes and follows the show, I'm big on the financial psychology. Whatever stage you are in your career or in your life, it's perfectly understandable to be concerned about how economic uncertainty like this year we're seeing right now, might impact your ability to live the lifestyle you want after retiring or when you want to become financially free from the job that you currently have. But the worst thing you can do, and I'm just going to share this openly, is to stick your head in the sand and hope for the best. Sure, none of us can control how long this current storm will last precisely, or predict when the next one might hit. But by monitoring your return rate versus your expected expenses, by taking full advantage of all the items I just mentioned, of savings vehicles and contributions while you can to your retirement plan, and getting the right balance, as I also mentioned, between your portfolio of active, both while you're active working and retirement, around fixed or variable investments or fixed or variable expenses you'll need, you're going to give yourself the best possible chance of steering your portfolio and your assets through it all. your portfolio and your retirement will all still be intact. Remember the game you're playing sometimes. When you go from the working stages of your life, again, whatever age that might be, what I'll call the accumulation stage of your life, to ultimately the financially freedom phase or retirement, the name of the game is sustainability and longevity and not overreacting in our investments and in our life. Remember what I said before. What you don't do almost matters more or as much as what you do. And I think when you think about that concept and really understand and talk with your advisor and talk it through, it starts to make sense about how you want to look at your plan and look at the volatility we're seeing this year. But now is the time to dig in. Now is the time to make sure that if there's any anxiety or fears you have, you really need to make sure that you're walking that through with an advisor. Now's the time for counsel. Like, this is where we roll up our sleeves of advisors to make sure that you have all those listed items I mentioned and they're working for you. Now, I mentioned about how to navigate and protect yourself from volatility, and I know what's going on right now is stressful. Trust me, I get it, especially when a lot of it we can't control. But the things you can control matter. You can control your variable expenses. You can control who you choose to help you with your investments and with your planning, and you can control sticking to a discipline. Those things you can control. The stuff that gets in the way is the noise. That's the water that gets in your ship. Don't let what's happening around you get inside you and weigh you down and make you make decisions that maybe were not planned or weren't a part of your discipline when it comes to your investments. Okay, it's time to answer your questions here on the Make Your Money Matter show. If you have a question or topic you'd like me to address, you can leave a comment or a question in the comment section. Or if it's something a bit more personal, you want to do it one-on-one, just go to the About page on this channel and send us an email. As always, we'll keep the questions I read here anonymous, so you never have to worry about your name being shared, but we would love to hear from you. And this week's came in very quickly around volatility. Go figure, right? When are we going to have this volatility end? What are we seeing here that you can speak to? And I want to share it this way. No one has a crystal ball, okay? And if they say they do, run, please. All right? You want to really look at planning and managing through the volatility. I mentioned a couple points today on the episode, obviously, that I think are some really good items of stress testing, taking a stock at where you're at, finding counsel to really kind of, talk with that around, find that experienced, credentialed, and fiduciary advisor who's been there before, who can kind of help you navigate that. That's really paramount. And then take a look at the investments and where you're investing. And are there opportunities during this volatility? I think volatility has a negative connotation a lot of times. It means like things are chaotic and uncertain. And yes, that is true, but there's also beauty in it sometimes. And we have that in our life as well as in the markets. So if we can look at the beauty side of it, more the glass half full, if you will, find the right opportunities that might help you. I mentioned my analogy today on the show of 1 step backwards, 2 step forwards. Find what's going to help you in the 2 step forward part of your life. Don't get too lost in the daily today when it comes to volatility. And I've shared this before, but there's countless stats on what we've seen over the past 10, 20, 30, 40 years that I think helps us put into context a year like this. And again, I mentioned this on the top of the show. We've all been a little bit spoiled since 2008. We've had low interest rates, good markets coming off basically a low of what we had after 2008. And I think this is a normal market correction. And by the way, again, I kind of joked about this before. If you line up economic nerds like myself or advisors in a room, the majority of times we'll disagree on subjective matters. This one I think we all would agree on. If you were to line us up and say, all right, you have 2 ingredients to concoct the highest inflation in the shortest amount of time, what would those be? Pretty simple. Close down the world and print money. We've seen that. That's what we're seeing. Basically, for the past 2 years, we've had quite a party, and now have a hangover. Here's what I want to say about volatility. The good thing about a hangover is it's not permanent. Again, if you have a question or comment you'd like me to read here, leave it in the comment section or email us in the About page on our channel. But before we go today, if you found anything helpful today and want to learn more, you can visit our website at onecapital.com. You can also call or text us. We want to help. Listen, there's no pressure here. We don't treat people like a number. In fact, we value relationships. It's the lifeblood of what we do. So click, call, or text us today. If you're not following us on social media, you should be. You can follow us at Make Your Money Matter. We're sharing great information on all of our social media platforms. As I often say, if you like the show, share with someone you like. If you don't like the show, I guess share with someone you don't like. But until next time, always remember, make your money matter.
The information in this show is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration a listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.